Welcome back to Hill of Justice, and let's talk about Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Let's talk about what happens when a verbal argument over a parking space turns fatal in a matter of seconds. What you're looking at is a Walmart parking lot in North Lauderdale, Florida. It's a Tuesday afternoon, and two adults are having an argument over a parking space, which just happens all the time, right? One is a 62-year-old military veteran and a former ER trauma nurse. He goes by the name of DeGleomo, I believe. The other is an unnamed woman holding a firearm pointed directly at his torso, if you can see here. The video shows her telling him to back away. It shows him continuing to step forward. Then a single shot is fired into his abdomen. He falls to the asphalt. And this is where he later dies at the hospital. The Broward Sheriff's Office responded. They took her into custody and then they released her without charges while the state's attorney reviews the case. She claims it was self defense. Now, as a former detective, I want to break down what the police are looking at, what the statute actually says, and why feeling threatened is not the same thing as a legal right to take a life. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we look at. When we're watching this witness video, they are looking at who took whose parking spot. No, nobody looks at that. Nobody cares who took whose parking spot. That doesn't matter. And it really doesn't matter under the law. They're looking at three specific elements. They're looking at the distance between the two, the physical capability of him and her, and the escalation of force, which will be her holding the weapon, him advancing towards. So witnesses on the scene state that the victim used his vehicle to block the woman from parking. It happens all the time, right? Verbal altercation occurred. And what happened, if you can see in the video, the woman already has her weapon drawn. And this will be important later on. She is on her cell phone with law enforcement, which will be critical later on, while keeping the gun level at his chest. Now, if you take a look closely at the physical disparity of the two, he's a 62-year-old male. She's a younger female. And under Florida law, to justify the use of deadly force, you must have a reasonable belief that such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to yourself. The defense is going to argue that an angry, larger male closing the distance on a female, even after a firearm is produced, constitutes an immediate threat of great bodily harm. They will argue that she had nowhere to retreat, even though under Stand Your Ground, she has no duty to retreat at all. But let's look at the tape again, because that's where we get into the meat and potatoes of everything. Let's take a look here, because in a self-defense case, movement is going to be everything, especially where the feet's at. The footage shows the woman actively retreating. She backs up several feet, creating distance while keeping her firearm drawn. Simultaneously, you see the 62-year-old male does not stop. He maintains his pace. He's closing the gap, stepping directly into the space that she just vacated. I'm going to let you know now, as an investigator, when I see a citizen backing away, it tells me two critical things simultaneously. First, it establishes her subjective mindset. She's trying to de-escalate the proximity. She is explicitly demonstrating that she does not want a physical altercation whatsoever. Second, it completely strips away the prosecution's ability to call her a mutual combatant. And I know this term, really got my sister in a tailspin several years back. So I'm going to go ahead and translate what this phrase means for the folks at home. A lot of you at Hill Nation understand this. A mutual combatant is a legal term for when two people voluntarily agree to a fight. Okay? It's almost like it's an unwritten agreement where both sides say, let's settle this with our hands. Under Florida law, though, if you willingly step up to trade blows, you can't claim self-defense because both people are considered wrongdoers. But to be a mutual combatant, there must be a mutual consent. Look at her actions on this tape. She isn't consenting to a fight. She is actively walking backward. And there is the second equally critical factor unfolding almost simultaneously. She isn't just backing up. She's actively on the phone with law enforcement. Now, I'm going to tell you in our world, this creates what we call a stream of consciousness recording. Okay. So this is how that plays out. When a person is actively engaging with a 911 dispatcher during a life or death crisis, they don't have time to manufacture a story. It's happening in real time. Their voice, their heavy breathing, their frantic warnings to the dispatcher, to the aggressors are being captured in raw, real time audio. To a jury, this is incredibly powerful evidence of her being in subjective fear, right? Many people watching this tape will argue that she was doing exactly what a responsible gun owner is supposed to do. She didn't just pull a weapon out and shoot. She actively summoned authorities to intervene and help de escalate the situation before a trigger was ever pulled. Her line to safety was already open. When 911 tape is played in court, the prosecution isn't just fighting the videotape anymore. They are fighting the raw audio of a human being in a state of panic, begging for the police to arrive while an unarmed man refuses to stop closing the distance. But here's where the prosecution is going to dig in. And this is where we're going to have fireworks. To claim self defense, you cannot be the initial aggressor, or you must have clearly withdrawn from the conflict first. If she drew her weapon during a purely verbal argument before any physical threat was made, she may have committed an aggravated assault with a firearm, right? I would say right then and there. But as you see, this can scale. You cannot create a deadly scenario, introduce a lethal weapon, and then claim you had no choice but to pull the trigger because the other person didn't back down from the gun. You cannot do that whatsoever. Or can you? Now, I know what a lot of you are going to say right now. You're going to say, guess what? What about George Zimmerman? He followed Trayvon Martin. He started the confrontation. He got away with it under the same Florida law, stand your ground. And this is where I got to go ahead and clear this up because the public narrative on this is not the reality that happened in the courtroom. George Zimmerman's defense team knew that they couldn't use stand your ground, and they didn't. They waived that and ran a traditional classic self-defense case at trial. Why? Because they absolutely knew, Zimmerman's team knew that they could not get away with that because of the messy, disputed facts of who started the confrontation. And that was him. Couldn't use stand your ground. So what generally happened with the case, if you look at it, was they had to look at the physical breakdown of the two events. He started it, yet the confrontation happened. And this verdict that you saw with Zimmerman was hinged basically entirely on the fact that when the trigger was pulled, Zimmerman was on his back and on the pavement, having his head struck against the concrete. And because he was sustaining physical injuries, the legal team went about saying that this could have endangered his life. A jury found that that exact moment of the shooting that he was experiencing a physical beating that could have ended his life. But I want to go ahead and go past that because there's other things in that court case that was completely out of control. Now, let's go back to the Walmart parking lot. In this case, there is no physical struggle on the ground. We know that. There are no fists flying. The victim is completely unarmed, and the distance between them is being actively recorded on cell phones and on cameras all over the place. And if you're the defense in the Walmart case, you cannot rely on the Zimmerman playbook. That you cannot do. But you can't argue your client was actively pinned down and being beaten. So you can't do that. You have to prove that an unarmed 62-year-old man simply walking up towards a drawn gun created an imminent lethal threat so severe that pulling the trigger was her only option. That is a completely different legal hill to climb. Furthermore, the investigators will have to look at the exact moment of the shooting. Was he lunging? Did he raise his hands? Or was he simply standing his ground verbally? Because a verbal insult in of itself, no matter how unhinged it is, it does not authorize a citizen to deploy deadly force on a public street. There's a caveat to that. And we won't get into that, but there is a caveat to that. The Broward Sheriff's Office did not make an immediate arrest, which tells us they are being incredibly precise and political. They are handing a clean file over to the state's attorney's office to let the grand jury or the prosecutor decide the charges will be filed. This is the reality of carrying a firearm here in the United States. A dispute over 12 feet of that concrete that they were protecting or disputing at a local supermarket can now result in one man dead in a grave and the other one potentially facing, I believe, 25 years to life in a state penitentiary here. So just let me know what you think you see in the video. Does the unarmed man walking toward a drawn gun justify a shot in the stomach, or is this a clear case of manslaughter? I want you to drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do I think will happen? You'll find that in the comments below. I'm Jerome Hill. This is the Hill of Justice, and thank you for watching.
This is the Hill of Justice.